Hello friends, hello professionals, and welcome back to my channel, The Sea of Regulation. I'm going to be introducing a bit of new content. There are people who are reaching out to me, they're subscribing, thank you so much, and they have some questions. They're not in financial services and they want to get a better understanding of the basics. So I'm introducing a bit of a change in terms of the basics in compliance. So before I get started on this particular video, I'll be looking at international standard setters in this one. Let me get my usual disclaimers out of the way. I'm a financial services regulator. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a professional advisor. And the views on this channel are definitely my own and do not represent any regulatory authority or international standard setter. And now with that out of the way, let's dive in. So my disclaimer actually cites that these views are not any international standard setting body. And in financial services, there are a few people who don't know who those bodies are. And I'm going to explain what an international standard setter is and who are the big ones in financial services. An international standard setter is an organization or a grouping of individuals or countries and delegates from those countries that come together to look at the issues impacting a particular industry and set the standards, international standards, for that particular sector. Now, there are a number of international standard setting bodies, and I'm going to start with insurance. The International Association of Insurance Supervisors, or IAIS, is the body that produces insurance core principles, and they've been around for a few decades. Now, insurance is something that has been around as a product for about 300 or 400 years. So you would appreciate that there are certain issues that would come up over those centuries that would put the provision of insurance at risk. Now, what those international standard setters are setting out are the things that should be done for proper conduct of insurance business. And the standards apply to regulators, and regulators would then take those standards and transpose them into local laws. So any jurisdiction that regulates insurance, and that's pretty much everyone on the planet, would have regard to what the IAIS puts out. International standards do change because life changes, and that's the only constant we really have in life. So just like any other international standard setter, IAIS would update different core principles based on different emerging developments, threats, issues, or advances in technology and apply them into their ICPs. The next international standard setter I'm going to look at is one that is mispronounced when people try to use the acronym as a word. It's Iasco, the International Organization of Securities Commissioners. Now, Iasco is responsible for securities and investment business. And similar to IAIS, they set principles as it relates to the conduct of securities and investment business. And again, a similar setup with the organization. They have a grouping of members. They've been around for a few decades, and they would look to make sure that there are certain principles that are internationally adopted and then transposed into local law and applied for the conduct of securities business. The next international standard setter is one that people might not recognize as a standard setter, but definitely is, and it is GIFX, the Group of International Financial Centers Supervisors, and they developed the standard for trust and corporate services providers. Now, this group, almost 30 years ago, developed the best practice for trust and corporate services providers. So it's not that they've just sprung up overnight. They've been doing a lot of work for a lot of years. And out of all of the standard setting bodies, with the exception of one, they are the only international standard setter that assesses their members for compliance against those standards. So the TCSP standard is actually a set of provisions in terms of, again, how each jurisdiction should look to regulate the sector, that is, trust and corporate services providers. So that's anyone who incorporates a company, helps in the formation of trusts, and the post-incorporation activities. So there's a lot that goes on when a company is live. And to make sure that there are certain controls in place in a jurisdiction to make sure that companies are not being misused for nefarious purposes. And that tends to get a lot of press, and it's an area that's not well understood. So if you've not been familiar with GIFX, Definitely check them out and their standard. All of the information, as per usual, will be in the description below. The next international standard setter that I am going to touch on is BCBS, the Basel Committee for Banking Supervision. Now, this is a bit of a tricky one. Banking, again, is something that has been around for a number of centuries, and you have a bigger body that sits above BCBS, and that is the Bank of International Settlements. They have been in the news quite a bit, and they've been quite busy in the fintech and cryptocurrency space as it relates to embracing innovation, cross-border payment solutions, and making sure that there are things that work for the future of banking and payments and cross-border remittances. But before I get sidetracked, let me just get back to the topic. So again, there are certain banking core principles that have been developed over the centuries in relation to the conduct of banking supervision and in relation to how banks should operate. So globally, you will recognize that banks typically operate the same, and for a large part, a lot of the regulatory regimes have similar principles. And this is again because of the Basel Committee for Banking Supervision acting as that international standard setter to make sure that there are certain provisions built into laws that are transposed by regulators and the legislatures of different countries. The last international standard setter that I'm going to cover, and there are some others that might crop up, feel free to comment below on any body that you think that has contributed to the development of international standard setters. I can think of one, but there are definitely others. But the last one I'm going to touch on is the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. Some people say FATF. I like FATF. Now, FATF has been around for, again, a number of decades, promulgating anti-money laundering provisions, counter-terrorist financing, and counter-proliferation financing, even though they don't put the C in front of the PF. We definitely have to have regard for the FATF. Now, the membership is broad, and they have a number of FATF-style regional bodies. So in the Caribbean, you have CFATF, Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, and in other parts of the world, you have APG, Moneyval, and a number of other FATF-styled organizations. Now, what does FATF do other than set the international standards for AML-CFT? Well, other than FATF, and it's only gifcs, they assess member countries, in fact, all countries around the world, with maybe one or two exceptions, to see their compliance against the FATF recommendations. They've also developed methodology that allows persons to look at how countries are assessed and how recommendations should ideally be applied to be effective. And there's a lot of chatter in this space, especially in relation to the fintech space. Again, like other international standard setters, the FATF has to review and revise these recommendations from time to time to make sure that they're fit for purpose in a changing world. The last FATF full review of all of the recommendations was completed that led to the publication of FATF recommendations in 2012. I think it was Valentine's Day. Was that a gift to the world? Not sure, but they have since carried on with their work, and when you see certain emerging issues come up, they would publish typology reports, and they have them in a number of different areas that persons might not even recognize. Human trafficking, lots of money laundering going on there, and it might be used to finance terrorist activities. You would have trade-based money laundering. You would have a host of other issues that has cropped up in our modern world that, of course, would necessitate an up-to-date document or a revisit of certain recommendations. And they are looking at certain recommendations to be updated, particularly recommendation 24, which is important if you're in a financial services center. But before I get too deep into FATF, this is just to cover the basics. And if you have any comments or anything that you would want clarified at this particular level, let me know in the comments below. And with that, guys, I'm going to wrap it up here, and I'll see you in my next video.